My name is Leo. I'm 29, and I've made a quiet life for myself here in Seattle. It's a city of constant motion, of rain and steel and coffee, but my corner of it is still. I live in a simple studio apartment in Ballard, with a view of a brick wall and the distant sound of foghorns. By trade, I'm a courier, a job that's less about people and more about addresses and signatures. I spend my days navigating the city's arteries, delivering everything from legal briefs to architectural plans. It's not a career you dream about, but it covers the rent and keeps my world contained. I've always been a man of few words, more of an observer than a participant. Relationships have been a foreign language to me. I figured one day the translation would just click, but that day never seemed to arrive on my route. Most of my days were built on a rigid framework of routine, a specific route, a specific lunch spot, a specific time to clock out. And on that route there was a small, independent art gallery I passed every afternoon. I never went inside, but through the large plate glass window, I always saw her. Clara. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with auburn hair she often wore in a messy but elegant knot. She had tattoos that snaked up one arm like intricate vines, and she always seemed to be in motion, adjusting a frame, talking on the phone with a furrowed brow, or just standing in the middle of the room, hands on her hips, staring down a painting as if in a silent argument. She had an intensity that was captivating. She wasn't performing for anyone. She was simply existing in her world, a world of color and canvas that felt a universe away from my own. I was just the anonymous guy in a courier's uniform walking past on the sidewalk. In her world, I was invisible. Then came a Tuesday evening, the sky a bruised purple and spitting a cold, persistent drizzle. I was running late on my last delivery of the day, a set of urgent legal documents for a firm in a downtown high-rise. The lobby was mostly empty, the security guard barely looking up as I signed in. The delivery slip said the 4th floor. I got into the elevator, the sterile box lifting me up through the building's core. When the doors opened, I stepped out into a hallway that was dim and hushed. I saw a door propped open at the end of the hall and headed toward it, assuming it was the law office, maybe a paralegal waiting for me after hours. I stepped through the doorway into a large open space, my boots echoing softly on the polished concrete floor. It was darker in here, with track lighting creating pools of light on the walls. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding louder than I intended. "Courier service for Sterling and Price." From a back office, a figure emerged, and my breath caught in my chest. It was her, Clara. Her hair was down, falling around her shoulders, and she was wearing an old, paint-splattered sweatshirt. Her eyes, wide and startled, locked onto mine. There was no recognition, only pure, undiluted fear. It was the kind of fear that makes you acutely aware of your own size, of the space you occupy. As a black man walking unannounced into a place where a white woman is alone, it's a look I've been conditioned to anticipate, but it never stops feeling like a punch to the gut. Before I could offer a single word of explanation, before I could even raise the package in my hand as a sign of my harmless purpose, she began to back away from me. Her hand fumbled behind her, searching for the door I'd just walked through. I heard the sharp, definitive thunk of a deadbolt sliding into place. I froze, holding up my hands instinctively, the legal envelope clutched in one of them. "I think there's been a mistake," I said, keeping my voice as low and steady as I could manage. "I'm not supposed to be here." Her breathing was ragged, her knuckles white where she gripped the doorknob. Her gaze darted from me to the phone on her desk and back again. But her voice, when it came, was not a scream. It was a low, trembling declaration. "Now you are." A heavy silence filled the space between us, thick with her terror and my own rising anxiety. I knew I had to de-escalate this, and fast. "Ma'am," I started slowly, "my name is Leo. I work for Cascade Couriers. I have a delivery for a law firm, Sterling and Price." The slip said the 4th floor. I took a careful, deliberate step toward a pool of light, holding out the package so she could see the label, and then my company ID badge clipped to my jacket. I think I got the wrong floor. I watched as her eyes followed my movements, processing the information. The rigid line of her shoulders softened almost imperceptibly. The panic in her eyes began to recede, replaced by a wave of confusion, and then dawning embarrassment. She let out a long, shaky breath. "The law firm is downstairs," she said, her voice hoarse. "This is the 5th floor." She looked at the locked door, then back at me, a flush creeping up her neck. "Oh God, I am so sorry. There was an incident recently. My ex, I panicked." She ran a hand through her hair, looking completely mortified. The key is right here." She went to her desk, her hands still shaking as she sorted through a small ceramic bowl filled with keys, paper clips, and loose change. She tried one key, then another. Neither worked. A small, frustrated sigh escaped her lips. "It's the master key. My landlord must have it. I never use this lock." We were stuck, trapped together in a room that had, moments before, been a space of pure terror for her. The irony was suffocating. To break the excruciatingly awkward silence, I gestured toward a large, abstract canvas on the wall, a chaotic swirl of blues and deep reds. "Is that one of yours?" I asked. She glanced over, seeming grateful for the change of subject. "No, it's by a local artist, Amelia Vance. I'm just the curator, the person who tries to make sense of the beautiful chaos." For the next 30 minutes, as she periodically tried another key or made a call to the building manager that went to voicemail, she gave me an impromptu tour. She showed me how to spot the texture of a brushstroke, how the lighting could change the mood of a sculpture. I found myself talking more than I usually did in a month, asking about her work, about the artists. I learned that a small, colorful crayon drawing of a volcano taped to her computer monitor was done by her 7-year-old son, Sam. She learned that I dabbled in photography, a hobby I kept mostly to myself. She wasn't the intense, untouchable figure from behind the glass anymore. She was real, and a little frayed around the edges, and funny in a dry, self-deprecating way. Finally, she found the right key tucked away in a drawer she'd already checked twice. The sound of the deadbolt retracting was jarringly loud. As I stood in the open doorway, ready to leave, she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Again," she said quietly, "I am so sorry for all of that." I just shook my head. "Don't be. You were protecting yourself. I get it." I gave her a small, hesitant smile. It was the most interesting wrong delivery I've ever made. For the first time, she smiled back, a genuine, tired smile that transformed her whole face. That brief, accidental encounter left a more profound mark on me than I could have possibly imagined. For days after being locked in the gallery with Clara, my mind was useless for anything else. The memory of it played on a loop, the initial fear in her eyes, the slow thaw into conversation, the way she talked about art with a passion that made the air around her seem to vibrate. My carefully constructed routine felt hollow. The city, which had always been just a grid of streets to navigate, suddenly felt different, holding the possibility of something unexpected. I knew I had to go back, not as a courier, not by accident, but as me, Leo. It took me 3 days to build up the courage. I walked past the gallery twice, my heart hammering against my ribs, before I finally pushed the door open. The little bell above it chimed softly. Clara was at the front desk, on the phone, and she looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. She gave me a small nod and a 1-minute gesture. I pretended to browse the paintings, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, feeling as out of place as a delivery van in an art museum. When she hung up, she walked over, a cautious but not unfriendly expression on her face. "Back for another unscheduled visit?" she asked, a hint of her dry humor returning. I wanted to see the art without a legal deadline this time," I managed to say, feeling my cheeks grow warm. "And to make sure you didn't change the locks." She laughed, a real, throaty laugh that was even better than her smile. "No, but I did label the keys. Lesson learned." That day, we talked for nearly an hour. she told me. About her son, Sam, who was obsessed with paleontology and hated broccoli with a fiery passion. I learned she'd moved to Seattle from Idaho after her divorce, wanting a fresh start for them both. I found myself telling her things I rarely shared, about growing up in a military family, moving every few years, about my quiet dream of one day having my photography featured somewhere, anywhere. I wasn't just a courier to her anymore, and she wasn't just a woman in a window. We were becoming two people. Slowly, very slowly, this became our new normal. I'd stop by the gallery once or twice a week. Our conversations started to deepen, moving from art and work to more personal territory. She spoke about her ex-husband with a weary resignation. He wasn't a monster, just a man who had chosen alcohol over his family, and now he drifted in and out of their lives, making promises he rarely kept. I could see the weight she carried in the slight slump of her shoulders when she spoke about him, the exhaustion in her eyes. I never offered advice or tried to fix anything. I wasn't equipped for that. But I could listen. I could be a quiet, steady presence. Sometimes I'd bring her a coffee, black with 2 sugars, just how she'd mentioned she liked it once. She'd always protest, but I could see in her smile that she appreciated it. Then, one Friday evening, it felt different. I was dropping off a final package nearby and saw the lights were still on in the gallery, long after closing time. I hesitated on the sidewalk, then found myself walking toward the door. I knocked softly on the glass. She looked up from where she was struggling to move a heavy metal sculpture and unlocked the door. "Leo," she said, surprised. "Working late?" "Just finished," I said. "Looks like you could use a hand with that." I helped her move the sculpture to a new pedestal. Afterward, we stood in the quiet, softly lit gallery, the sounds of the city outside muffled and distant. It felt like our first meeting, but without the fear, only a comfortable, charged silence. She was talking about a new exhibit she was planning, her voice soft in the stillness of the room. She spoke of feeling adrift lately, like she was just treading water. I told her I knew the feeling, that for most of my life I'd felt like I was watching everyone else's life from the outside. "You're different," she said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. She was looking at me, her gaze intense. "Different how?" I asked, my heart starting to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. "You're not trying to get something from me," she explained. "You're not trying to save me. You just are. You listen. I don't think I've ever really had that before." The air between us grew thick. My brain was screaming at me to play it safe, to make a joke and change the subject, but my heart, for the first time, refused to be quiet. I turned to face her fully. She didn't look away. And before the logical part of my brain could veto the decision, the words were out of my mouth. "What would you do if I kissed you right now?" The silence that followed stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a heartbeat. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. She leaned in, not all the way, but just enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath on my skin. "Find out," she whispered. And so, I did. I closed the small distance between us and kissed her. It wasn't like the movies. There was no soaring music, no fireworks. It was quiet and tentative and real. Her lips were soft, but there was a deep sadness in the kiss, a hesitation, as if she was afraid to want it too much. It felt like she was opening a door she had long since bolted shut, and she wasn't sure what was on the other side. When we finally pulled apart, she just looked at me, her eyes searching mine for something I couldn't name. I had no idea what to say, so I just stared back, my entire being buzzing with a terrifying, exhilarating energy. "I haven't done that in a long time," she said finally, her voice soft. "Me neither," I admitted, which was the understatement of the century. She took a small step back, creating a space between us again. "I should get home," she said, the spell broken. "Sam's with a sitter." I nodded, my throat too tight to form words. There were no promises made, no plans for a next time. She just gave me that same tired, warm smile from our first meeting and walked away, leaving me alone in the gallery, surrounded by silent art. I stood there for a long time, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life, or if, for the first time, I had finally done something absolutely right. The morning after the kiss in the gallery, I woke up feeling like a different person. The usual weight that sat on my chest, the low-grade hum of loneliness, was gone. In its place was a lightness, a nervous energy that felt like hope. I got out of bed without hitting snooze. I took my time in the shower, put on my nicest work shirt, the one that was only slightly wrinkled. I felt a sense of anticipation that was completely foreign to me. At my usual time, I drove my route, but when I approached the block where the gallery was, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. I parked and walked over, my heart doing a nervous two-step. I walked in, the bell chiming our arrival. Clara was there, behind the counter, just as she always was. But the atmosphere was instantly, chillingly different. She looked up, and the warmth I had come to expect was gone. There was no small smile, no easy greeting. Just a quick, guarded glance before her eyes darted away. "Leo?" she said, her tone flat and professional. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, my voice cracking slightly. "Just passing by." She nodded, turning to organize a stack of postcards, her back to me. The silence was a physical thing, pressing in on me. There were no questions about my day, no shared jokes. When our fingers brushed as she handed me a brochure I hadn't asked for, she pulled her hand back as if she'd touched a hot stove. I lingered for another moment, a fool hoping she would turn around, say something, anything. She didn't. I left the gallery, the little bell mocking me on my way out, the feeling of hope sinking in my gut like a stone. The rest of the day was a blur of self-doubt. I cycled through a dozen possible explanations. Maybe she was just having a bad day. Maybe Sam was sick. Maybe she was just busy. But by the time the sun started to set, a colder, sharper truth began to surface. She regretted it. The thought was a bitter pill. That kiss had felt like a beginning. Something honest and real. I was sure she had felt it too, that flicker of connection in the quiet gallery. But the look in her eyes that morning hadn't been from someone who was excited about a new possibility. It was the look of someone reinforcing her walls, brick by painful brick. I gave it a day, then another. The silence from her was absolute. No texts, no calls. The gallery window, when I passed it, seemed to hold a stranger again. By the third day, the not knowing was eating me alive. It was a Thursday night, and I knew she usually closed up around 7. I walked to the gallery, my stomach in knots. I stood across the street for a few minutes, watching her move inside, a solitary figure in the warm light. Taking a deep breath, I crossed the street and opened the door. There were a couple of people still browsing. She saw me, and for a fraction of a second, her expression tightened, a flash of something. Surprise, maybe dread, before it went carefully blank. "Hey," I said, approaching the counter. "Can we talk for a minute?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the remaining customers. "I'm closing in 5. "I'll wait," I said, and took a seat on a small bench near the window, my anxiety twisting into a tight knot. At 7:06, after the last customer had left and she had locked the door, she came and sat in the chair opposite me. She crossed her arms, her posture defensive. She didn't speak, leaving the opening for me. "Did I do something wrong?" I asked, the words feeling clumsy and loud in the quiet room. She blinked, seeming surprised by the directness of the question. "No, Leo. You didn't do anything wrong." "Then why are you avoiding me?" The question hung in the air between us. She let out a long breath, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm not avoiding you," she said, her voice so soft I had to lean in to hear it. "I'm protecting myself." I frowned, confused. "Protecting yourself? From me?" She shook her head slowly. "No, from what this," she gestured vaguely between the two of us, "could turn into." There was a long pause before she continued. "I liked that kiss, Leo. I liked it more than I wanted to. And that terrifies me." "Why?" I asked gently. "Because my life is a carefully balanced, chaotic mess," she said, a raw honesty in her voice. I have a son who needs all of me. I have an ex who has decided this month that he wants to be a father again, which means my world is constantly being disrupted. I don't have the space for feelings that keep me up at night, wondering and worrying. I looked down at my hands, every prepared speech I'd rehearsed in my head dissolving into nothing. She leaned forward slightly. When I said you're different, I meant it. And that's part of the problem. You're quiet, and you're kind, and you don't push. I'm not asking for anything complicated, I said, my voice pleading. I like being around you. And that, she whispered, looking up at me, her eyes glistening, is exactly why it's so terrifying. The silence that followed wasn't angry or cold. It was heavy with unspoken things, with the weight of her past and the uncertainty of our future. I nodded slowly, the fight going out of me. Okay, I said, the word tasting like defeat. I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. She looked genuinely surprised. You're not going to argue? I gave her a sad smile. I've never been good at arguing, especially not with someone who's clearly hurting. You're a good man, Leo, she said softly. I stood up, needing to leave before I said something I'd regret. Yeah, well, that's my brand. She stood up too. We just looked at each other for a moment. Take care of yourself, Clara. You too. I nodded once, then turned and walked to the door. Just as my hand touched the handle, she called out my name, her voice small. Leo, wait. I looked back at her. I'm not saying never, she said, her expression pained. I'm just saying, not now. I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak, and walked out into the cold night air. I didn't sleep that night, but it was a different kind of sleeplessness than before. It wasn't the buzz of hope. It was a hollow, aching emptiness. I didn't feel rejected, not entirely. I felt like I'd been put on pause, like someone had started to write a story and then just walked away, leaving the page infuriatingly blank. The next few weeks, I avoided that part of the city altogether. I requested a different route from my dispatcher, a conscious effort to respect the boundary she had drawn. Not now meant she needed space, and the last thing I wanted to be was another man in her life who didn't listen. But my mind didn't follow the new route. Every morning I'd find myself thinking of her. I'd catch myself glancing at the clock at the time I used to pass her gallery, a phantom limb of a habit. I wondered if she was okay, if Sam had lost another tooth, if she ever thought about me at all. One night, sitting alone in my apartment, I typed out a text message, pouring every bit of my frustration and hope into the little screen. I'm still here if you ever change your mind. I'm not going anywhere. I read the words over and over, my thumb hovering over the send button, but I didn't send it. I saved it in my drafts and shut my phone off. Sometimes the most difficult part of caring for someone isn't the heartbreak. It's the waiting. It had been 26 days. I wasn't consciously counting, but my body kept the score. Every afternoon around 3, when I used to pass her gallery, a pang of something would hit my chest. Every time I saw a woman with auburn hair, my head would turn before I could stop it. I had kept my promise. I'd given her space. No texts from my drafts folder were ever sent. No accidental drive-bys, no checking in. It was a quiet, agonizing exercise in patience. But I thought about her constantly. Not just the kiss, or the fear, or the rejection. I thought about the little things. The way she'd tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. The specific shade of blue paint that was perpetually under one of her fingernails. The weary but genuine way she smiled when she talked about her son. I missed her, but more profoundly, I missed the feeling of being seen, really seen for exactly who I was, by someone who didn't want me to be louder, or different, or more. Then, on a Wednesday evening, the pattern broke. I got home from my shift around 6:30, the sky outside already dark and rainy. I threw my bag on a chair, heated up some leftover chili, and sat down to watch a documentary I wasn't really paying attention to. About halfway through, I heard a faint, soft tapping at my apartment door. not a knock, more like a hesitant tap, tap, tap. I muted the TV, listening. It came again, just as quiet. I got up and opened the door to an empty hallway, but on the doormat, propped against the frame, was a small, square postcard. I bent down and picked it up. The front was a print of a painting I recognized, the chaotic swirl of blues and reds from her gallery. My heart began to beat a little faster. I flipped it over. Written in neat, familiar handwriting were just 6 words. Our bench, Sunday, 6 p.m. No name, no explanation. But I didn't need one, I knew. I sank back against the door, the postcard clutched in my hand, and felt a month's worth of tension begin to ease its grip on me, just slightly. The days leading up to Sunday were a special kind of torture. I was a disaster at work. I mixed up 2 delivery addresses, nearly dropped a fragile package, and spent most of my lunch break staring into space like a teenager with a crush. By the time Sunday finally arrived, I was a bundle of raw nerves. I got to the park 20 minutes early. It was a small green space a few blocks from the gallery, with a single wooden bench under a sprawling maple tree. Our bench, the place we'd talked about going to one day, to just sit and watch the city go by. I sat down, the wood cool beneath me, my hands buried in my pockets, my leg bouncing with an energy I couldn't contain. 6 o'clock came and went. 6:02. 6:05. A familiar panic began to creep in. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Then I heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path. I turned, and there she was. Clara. Her hair was pulled back. She wore no makeup, just an old gray hoodie and jeans. She looked tired and nervous and more beautiful than I had ever seen her. She was carrying a thermos and a small paper bag. She walked over and sat down beside me, leaving a careful foot of space between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, she held out the thermos. "I brought coffee," she said, her voice quiet. "It's probably lukewarm by now." "I don't mind," I said, my voice rough. I took the cup she poured for me. It was perfect. We sat there for a long time, the silence stretching between us, but this time it felt like a warm blanket, not a wall. Finally, she broke it. "I almost didn't send that postcard." I looked over at her. "Why did you?" She sighed, watching a group of kids playing on the swings. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about that night in the gallery. Not the kiss," she clarified, "but what you said before it. You said you just liked being around me. No agenda, no pressure." I nodded, waiting. "I've spent years with people trying to fix me," she continued, "or treating me like I'm some tragic project they need to rescue. You never did that. You just listened." "That's all I ever wanted to do," I said honestly. She turned to face me then. My ex came back around. For real this time. Not for me. For Sam. He's in a program, he's sober, he wants weekend visits. It threw my whole world off its axis. I couldn't trust my own judgment about anything, or anyone. She paused. "And then you showed up, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, and it terrified me." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Clara, I never wanted to make your life more complicated." "I know," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "And that's what made you so different." She reached into the paper bag and pulled out 2 slightly crushed, store-bought chocolate chip cookies. She handed one to me. We ate them in a comfortable silence. They were a little stale, but they were the best cookies I'd ever had. "Do you still think about that night?" she asked softly. "All the time," I admitted. She looked down at her hands, then back at me, her gaze steady and clear. "If I told you that I'm not ready for something serious, not yet, but that I wanted to start over, just slower, would that be okay?" I turned to her, a real smile spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. "Are we talking coffee slow or park bench slow?" She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that echoed in the quiet evening air. "Somewhere in between." I nodded, feeling the last of the weight lift off my shoulders. Yeah, I said. That's okay. We sat on that bench until the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the grass. We weren't two people rushing toward a finish line. We were two people quietly agreeing to take the first step. When we finally stood up to leave, she didn't say goodbye. She just looked at me and said, "I'll see you tomorrow." "At the gallery?" I asked. "At the gallery," she confirmed. She walked off toward her car, and I stayed for a minute longer, finishing the last of the lukewarm coffee and looking at the empty bench. For the first time in a month, I didn't feel paused. I felt like we were finally, carefully moving forward together. It has been 10 months since that evening on the park bench. I can recall every detail of it, the exact tone of her voice, the warmth of the coffee cup in my hands, the look in her eyes when she said, "somewhere in between." That moment wasn't a grand, sweeping declaration of love. It was something quieter and more profound. It was permission to begin again, without pressure or expectation. And we honored that. We didn't rush. We started with texts, then phone calls. I began stopping by the gallery again, but not with the anxious frequency of before. It was easy now, comfortable, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes I'd leave a funny postcard for her on the counter. Sometimes she'd slip me a day-old scone when her assistant wasn't looking. In early April, I finally met Sam. He was everything she'd described. A 7-year-old hurricane of boundless energy, dinosaur facts, and very strong opinions about ketchup. I was terrified, but Clara made it feel completely natural. I wasn't there to be a replacement dad or some new authority figure. I was just Leo, the guy who could fix his broken toy truck and happened to know how to draw a Tyrannosaurus Rex with appropriately terrifying teeth. We fell into a gentle rhythm of small things. Picnics at Golden Gardens when the sun made a rare appearance, wandering through the farmer's market on Sundays, movie nights at her apartment. The 3 of us would pile onto her worn-out couch with a giant bowl of popcorn, and Sam would inevitably fall asleep halfway through the movie, his head in her lap. And Clara and I would just sit there in the quiet glow of the television, too peaceful and content to speak. We didn't use the word relationship for a long time. It wasn't that it wasn't one, but putting a label on it too soon felt like it would make it fragile, something that could be broken by the weight of the word itself. She still had her difficult days, moments when the weight of her past would settle on her, and she would retreat into herself, going quiet, for hours. One afternoon, I came over to find her sitting on her bathroom floor, just holding a framed photo of Sam as a toddler. She didn't say much, just a whispered, "I just really thought my life was going to be so different." I didn't offer platitudes or try to fix her sadness. I just sat down on the floor beside her. After a few minutes of silence, she leaned her head against my shoulder and whispered, "You make it easier to breathe." That was the night I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was in love with her. Not the frantic, dramatic love from movies, but the quiet, steady kind. The kind that doesn't need to shout because it shows up every single day. In July, my world tilted. The courier company I worked for was bought out, and in the restructuring, I was laid off. It hit me harder than I expected, not just the financial blow, but the emotional one. That job, as mundane as it was, had been my structure, my identity. Suddenly, I felt adrift and small, like I had nothing stable to offer her. I retreated into my own head, not answering her texts for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. She stood in my doorway, her arms crossed, her expression firm. "Don't you dare disappear on me, Leo," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Not after everything." I let her in and confessed that I felt like a failure, a loser. She just shook her head. "Well, I felt like a failure the day I signed my divorce papers," she said, sitting next to me on the couch. "And yet, here we are. Neither of us is broken. We're just rebuilding." She spent the rest of the afternoon helping me update my resume. She put me in touch with a friend of hers who managed facilities for the Seattle Museum District. Within 2 weeks, I had a new job as a maintenance technician. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it was mine. By the time the autumn leaves started to turn, we had found our rhythm. Sam started second grade. I found a new apartment, still my own, but only a 5-minute walk from theirs. Some nights I'd cook dinner for us. Other nights we'd walk to the local bookstore just to browse the aisles and breathe in the smell of paper and ink. And somewhere in between the shared meals, the spilled juice, and the quiet evenings on her couch, Clara's smile began to change. It wasn't the practiced professional one she used with gallery patrons, or even the weary one I'd first come to know. This smile was softer, slower to form, and it reached all the way to her eyes. It was the smile of someone who had finally let their guard down and discovered it was safe to do so. A month ago, over a quiet Saturday breakfast, I brought up the idea of living together. It wasn't a grand gesture, no ring hidden in a pancake. She was spreading jam on a piece of toast for Sam. "What would you think," I began carefully, "about maybe finding a place together? The three of us." She didn't answer right away. She finished making the toast, cut it into triangles the way Sam liked it, and set the plate down. Then she sat down across from me and looked at me, her expression serious. "You are the first man since my marriage ended," she said slowly, "that I have ever trusted enough to even consider sharing a roof with again." A slow smile spread across her face. "So, yeah, let's find a place." We didn't make a big production out of it. We just started looking. We found a 2-bedroom duplex on a quiet street with a small, fenced-in backyard for Sam and a kitchen with god-awful yellow countertops. But she loved the light in the living room, so I loved it too. Today is our first morning in our new home. Sam is still asleep in his new room, surrounded by unpacked boxes of toys. Clara is curled up on the couch, wearing one of my old sweatshirts, her feet tucked under her as she reads a book. The air smells like fresh paint and the cinnamon rolls I just pulled out of the oven. I sit down beside her, and she leans against me without a word. We don't need to fill the silence anymore. We just exist in it, together. After a while, I say, "Do you remember the first real question I ever asked you?" She smiles without looking up from her book. "You asked what I would do if you kissed me." She closes the book, marking her page, and turns her head to look at me. Her eyes are soft and full of a history that I am now a part of. "You said, 'Find out,'" I say, grinning. I still feel the same. She puts her hand on my cheek, her touch warm and familiar. More than ever. I lean in and kiss her. It's different now than it was in the gallery. There's no fear, no hesitation, no sadness. It's just right. It's home. When we pull away, she whispers, "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for being so patient with me." I shake my head, tightening my arm around her. "You were never something that needed fixing, Clara. I think I was the one who needed something. I needed someone to believe I was worth showing up for." She holds my gaze, her eyes shining. "You were, right from the start. And that's how our story unfolds. Not with a dramatic climax or a tidy resolution written in the stars. It's just us, two people who refused to rush, who carried their scars not as baggage, but as maps of where they had been. We built this love like you build a house, brick by brick, day by day, breath by quiet breath. And now, finally, we live here.